I thought our family tradition was normal. Now I know it wasn't even close to that. Every Sunday at exactly 6 p.m., my grandfather would call me down to his basement. 3 knocks on the door, always 3, never more, never less. He'd count them out loud from the other side, his voice muffled through the thick wood. 1, 2, 3. Good boy, Wesley. Then the lock would click, and I'd hear his footsteps retreating down the stairs. I'd wait exactly 10 seconds before opening the door. Another rule he'd drilled into me since I was 7 years old. The basement smelled like old books and something metallic I could never quite identify, and Grandpa would be sitting in his leather chair with 2 cups of hot chocolate waiting on the small table between us. We'd talk for exactly 1 hour, about school, about sports, about anything except why we had this tradition in the first place. When the alarm on his watch beeped, our time was up. I'd climb the stairs, pull the door shut behind me, and hear the lock engage immediately. For 11 years, this was just what we did. My parents never questioned it, never joined us, never even asked what we talked about down there. It was Grandpa and Wesley time, sacred and unbreakable, every single Sunday without fail. My little sister Autumn asked about it once when she was maybe 6 years old. Why does Wesley get special Grandpa time and I don't? Mom's face went tight, and she steered Autumn into the kitchen with a hand on her shoulder, muttering something about how every family has their own ways of doing things. Dad didn't even look up from his newspaper, but I saw his hands grip the pages tighter, knuckles going white. Grandpa had been living with us since Grandma died when I was 3, taking over the entire basement as his personal space. Nobody else went down there, ever. Mom would leave his laundry at the top of the stairs in a basket, and it would be gone by morning, replaced by the previous week's clean clothes folded with military precision. Once, when I was 9, I tried to sneak down on a Wednesday afternoon, curious about what Grandpa did down there when we weren't having our Sunday sessions. The door was locked, obviously, but I pressed my ear against it anyway, listening. Complete silence. Not even the sound of movement or breathing. I'd knocked experimentally, 3 times like I'd been taught, but nothing happened. No response, no footsteps, nothing. I'd gone to find Grandpa and discovered him in the backyard, tending to his garden like always on Wednesday afternoons. When I asked him about the locked basement, he'd smiled and ruffled my hair. That's my private space, Wesley. A man needs his sanctuary. The tradition continued through my childhood without incident, so routine it became invisible. 3 knocks, 10-second wait, 1 hour of conversation, alarm beeps, leave. My friends thought it was weird that I couldn't hang out Sunday evenings, but I just shrugged it off as family stuff. By the time I was in high school, I'd stopped thinking about it altogether. It was just what we did, like some families went to church or had game night. Our thing was the basement meetings. Grandpa never missed one, even when he had the flu so bad he could barely stand. Even when I had the flu and could barely stand, Mom still sent me down there with a box of tissues and a bottle of hand sanitizer. Grandpa is expecting you, Wesley. You know how he gets if the routine is disrupted. I didn't actually know how he got, because in 11 years, we'd never disrupted the routine. Not once. Not even when Aunt Patricia died and the funeral was on a Sunday evening. We'd left the service early so I could make it home by 6 p.m., my parents sitting stone-faced in the front seat while Autumn cried in the back. Nobody complained about leaving early. Nobody suggested maybe this one time we could skip it. We just left, because the tradition demanded it. Everything changed 3 weeks ago on my 18th birthday. It was a Sunday, naturally, and my birthday party had been scheduled for the afternoon specifically to avoid conflicting with my 6 p.m. basement appointment. My girlfriend Iris had brought over a cake, and my friends Kyle and Nathan had given me a new gaming controller, and everything felt good and normal and right. Then 5:45 rolled around, and everyone started packing up to leave because they all knew about the standing Sunday evening commitment I had. Iris kissed me goodbye and whispered, "Hope your grandpa tradition thing goes well." And I remember thinking how strange it was that I'd never really explained what the tradition actually entailed. How could I, when I didn't really understand it myself? I headed to the basement door at 5:58, giving myself the usual 2 minutes to get into position. I raised my hand to knock at exactly 6 p.m., 3 sharp raps like always, but something made me hesitate. 18 felt different somehow, like maybe I was too old for this now. Like maybe it was time to have a real conversation about what this was actually about. So instead of 3 knocks, I only knocked twice. The silence that followed was absolute and terrifying. No counting from the other side. No acknowledgement at all. Just a horrible, heavy quiet that made my skin crawl. Then Grandpa's voice came through the door, but it didn't sound like him at all. The words were stretched and wrong, like someone imitating human speech without quite understanding how it worked. "Wrong number, Wesley. Wrong number of knocks. 3. Always 3. You know the rules." I felt ice shoot down my spine because that voice wasn't natural, wasn't right, wasn't human. I should have run. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around and get away from that door, away from that voice, away from whatever was wrong in that basement. But I'd been trained for 11 years to follow the routine, and breaking it felt impossible. My hand moved on its own, knocking 3 times properly this time, and immediately I heard the lock click open. 1, 2, 3. Good boy, Wesley. The voice was back to normal now, warm and familiar. My grandfather's voice exactly as it always sounded, but I'd heard the other thing underneath, and I couldn't unhear it. I counted to 10 like always, my heart slamming against my ribs, and then I opened the door. The basement stairs stretched down into darkness because the light was off, which had never happened before in 11 years of Sunday meetings. "Grandpa?" My voice cracked like I was 13 again. "Come down, Wesley, we need to talk." I descended the stairs slowly, each step creaking under my weight in the silent house. My hand found the light switch at the bottom and flipped it, and the fluorescent bulbs flickered to life with that familiar electric hum. Grandpa was sitting in his usual leather chair, but he wasn't looking at me. He was staring at the wall where he'd hung dozens of photographs I'd never noticed before, or maybe they'd never been there before. Every single photo showed our house, taken from different angles, different times of day, different years based on the seasons visible in the background. But they were all taken from across the street, from the same vantage point, like someone had been watching our house for years and documenting it obsessively. "Sit down, Wesley." Grandpa's voice was normal again, tired and old and sad. I sat in the chair across from him, noticing for the first time that the hot chocolate wasn't there. The small table between us was empty, except for a thick manila folder I'd never seen before. "You knocked twice today. That was the signal. The one I told your mother to teach you when you turned 18. I started to tell him I hadn't meant to, that it was an accident, but he held up his hand to stop me. "It means you're ready to know the truth, or at least, ready to make the choice." Grandpa opened the manila folder and pulled out a stack of photographs, older than the ones on the wall, dated from before I was born. They showed him in military uniform, but not a uniform I recognized. The insignia was wrong. The patches were in a language that looked almost like English but wasn't quite. "I need you to understand something, Wesley. I'm not your grandfather. I'm not even from here. Not originally." He watched my face carefully, gauging my reaction. I didn't say anything because words felt impossible, like my throat had sealed shut. "The man who would have been your grandfather died 3 months before you were born. Car accident, drunk driver, very tragic. Your grandmother was devastated. That's when they sent me." The photographs showed him with other people in the same wrong uniforms, standing in front of buildings that looked almost right, but were subtly off, like someone had built Earth architecture from memory, rather than blueprints. I was assigned to replace him, to live his life, to protect your family. There are others like me, scattered throughout this world, living human lives, maintaining the timeline. Every Sunday, I come down here to report. The 3 knocks are how they know it's safe to open the channel. I should have run then, should have screamed, should have done literally anything except sit there and listen, but my body wouldn't move, frozen in place by 11 years of trained obedience to this ritual. Grandpa continued, his voice patient like he was explaining homework. "The thing you need to understand is that your family is important. Not you specifically, Wesley, though you're a good kid, but your bloodline, your family tree, it produces something valuable. Someone valuable, 3 generations from now. Someone who will make a choice that determines whether humanity survives what's coming." He pulled out more photographs, these ones showing people I didn't recognize, spanning decades, maybe centuries. "We've been watching your family line for a very long time, protecting it, making sure the right people meet, the right children are born, the right choices are made. Your grandfather's death was an accident, but it was also an opportunity to place someone directly in the home, close enough to monitor threats and eliminate them before they could disrupt the timeline." The way he said, "eliminate," made my stomach turn. "You mean kill people?" He nodded slowly. "When necessary. There have been 7 interventions since I've been here. People who would have hurt you or your sister, people who would have led your parents astray, people who would have prevented the right futures from happening." The photographs on the wall suddenly made horrible sense. They weren't just pictures of our house. They were surveillance photos, documentation of people who'd gotten too close, people who'd been eliminated before I ever knew they were threats. I recognized some of them now that I was really looking. The man who'd tried to break into our house when I was 10, found dead 2 blocks away from a supposed heart attack. The teacher who'd been accused of inappropriate conduct with students, killed in a car crash before the trial. The boyfriend Aunt Patricia had brought to Thanksgiving dinner once, never seen again after Grandpa had a private conversation with him in the basement. "You've been killing people." My voice sounded distant, detached, like it belonged to someone else. "I've been protecting your family's future, and when I'm gone, someone needs to continue that protection. That's why we've spent every Sunday together for 11 years, Wesley. I've been training you." The hot chocolate conversations suddenly took on a sinister new meaning. All those discussions about problem solving, about making difficult choices, about understanding that sometimes good people have to do bad things for the right reasons. The 2 knocks today meant you were ready to learn the truth and make your choice. You can walk away right now, pretend this conversation never happened, live your life normally. But without protection, your family becomes vulnerable. The timeline becomes uncertain. Bad things happen. Grandpa leaned forward, his eyes locked on mine with an intensity I'd never seen before. "Or you can take my place. Learn what I know, do what I do, protect what needs protecting. I'm getting old, Wesley. This body is failing. I need to know your family will be safe after I'm gone." The basement felt smaller suddenly, the walls closing in. I thought about my parents upstairs, About Autumn doing her homework in her room, about Iris probably texting me wondering how the tradition thing went. Normal life, continuing normally, completely unaware of the horror show happening below them. What if I refuse? What if I just tell everyone what you are? Grandpa's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes, something that reminded me of the wrong voice I'd heard through the door. Then you'll forget this conversation ever happened. I'll find another way to protect your family, but the offer won't come again, and when I'm gone, they'll be vulnerable. The next replacement might not be as invested in keeping them safe. They might just maintain surveillance, let natural consequences play out, see if the timeline corrects itself. Is that what you want? I stood up, legs shaking, and headed for the stairs. I need to think about this. Grandpa nodded. You have until next Sunday. 3 knocks means yes, 2 knocks means no. Choose wisely, Wesley. I stumbled up the basement stairs and into the normal world, where Mom was cooking dinner and Dad was watching the news, and Autumn was singing along to music in her room. Everything looked the same, but felt completely different, like I was seeing a stage set rather than a real home. Iris called me that night, and I couldn't bring myself to answer because how do you have a normal conversation with your girlfriend after learning your grandfather is some kind of timeline-protecting killer from another dimension? I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to Grandpa moving around in the basement below me, and wondered how many times he'd left through whatever portal or door or channel he used to report to whoever he reported to. How many bodies had been disposed of to keep my family safe? How many futures had been erased so mine could continue? The next morning at breakfast, Grandpa was completely normal, asking me about my birthday party, complimenting Mom's pancakes, helping Autumn with her math homework. But I couldn't stop seeing the photographs on the basement wall, couldn't stop hearing that wrong voice, couldn't stop thinking about the choice I had 6 days to make. Monday and Wednesday passed in a blur, me going through the motions of school and life, while my brain spun in circles trying to make sense of what I knew. Kyle asked if I was okay, and I lied and said I was fine, just tired. How do you tell your best friend that your grandfather is some kind of interdimensional timeline guardian who's been murdering people to protect your bloodline? Thursday night, I woke up to voices coming from the basement. I crept downstairs, careful to avoid the third step that creaked, and pressed my ear to the door. Grandpa was talking to someone, but I only heard his side of the conversation. The boy knows now. He's processing. Yes, I used the 2-knock protocol. No, I don't think he'll talk. He's too invested in protecting his family. There was a long pause. If he refuses, we proceed with secondary surveillance. Yes, I understand the timeline is critical. The girl is nearly old enough to begin training as backup. 9 years old, plenty of time. He was talking about Autumn, my baby sister, being groomed as a replacement if I refused. The rage that surged through me was so intense, I nearly kicked the door in, nearly confronted him right then. But something stopped me. Maybe it was 11 years of training in patience and planning. Maybe it was the horrible realization that if Grandpa could eliminate threats to my family, he could eliminate me just as easily if I became a threat to his mission. I went back upstairs and started planning. If I couldn't confront Grandpa directly, I needed to understand what he actually was, where he came from, who he reported to. The photographs in the basement were a start, but I needed more information. Friday after school, I went to the library and started searching for anything that might explain what I'd witnessed. Interdimensional beings, timeline manipulation, government conspiracies, anything that might provide context. What I found instead was a newspaper article from 30 years ago, before I was born, about a series of disappearances in our town. 7 people over the course of 5 years, all connected to my family in some way. A business partner of my great-grandfather's who vanished after a dispute. A woman who'd dated my uncle before he met my aunt, gone without a trace. A neighbor who'd filed a noise complaint, never seen again. The article questioned whether there was a serial killer in town, but then the disappearances stopped and the story faded away. They stopped right around the time Grandpa moved in. I dug deeper, searching through archives, and found similar patterns in other towns, other families, stretching back decades. Always 7 disappearances, always connected to one specific bloodline, always stopping when someone new moved into the family. The timeline protection wasn't unique to my family. This was systematic, global, maybe bigger than I could comprehend. Saturday, I did something stupid and desperate. I waited until Grandpa left for his afternoon garden work, then I picked the basement door lock using a tutorial I'd watched on YouTube. My hands were shaking so badly it took 15 minutes, but eventually the mechanism clicked and the door swung open. I descended the stairs quickly, knowing I had maybe 30 minutes before he came back inside. The photographs on the wall told a story I didn't want to understand, but now I forced myself to really look. Each photo had a date and a designation written on the back. Timeline corruption risk, eliminated. Genetic variance threat, eliminated. Premature knowledge exposure, eliminated. The last one was dated 3 days ago, Thursday night, the same night I'd heard Grandpa talking about me knowing the truth. My photograph was in his hand in the image, and I realized with horror that someone had been taking surveillance photos of him, that there were others like him, watching him watch us, layers upon layers of monitoring and control. In the corner of the basement, Partially hidden behind boxes, I found what looked like a communications device. Not a phone or a computer, but something that hummed with energy I could feel in my teeth. I was reaching for it when I heard the back door open upstairs. Grandpa was home early. I had seconds to make a decision. I grabbed the device, shoved it under my shirt, and ran for the stairs. I made it to the basement door just as I heard Grandpa's footsteps coming down the hallway. I slipped through, pulled the door shut silently, and pressed my back against the hallway wall, heart hammering so hard I was sure he could hear it from outside. His footsteps paused at the basement door, and I heard the handle turn slowly. The door opened, closed. I heard him descend the stairs, and then a roar of rage that made the house shake. "Wesley!" I ran to my room and locked the door, knowing it wouldn't stop him if he really wanted to get in. The device under my shirt was vibrating now, warm against my skin, and images were flooding into my mind. Not images, memories. Thousands of them, belonging to dozens of different people who'd been like Grandpa, placed in families throughout history, protecting bloodlines, eliminating threats, maintaining the timeline. I saw myself from the outside, saw my future selves, saw the branching possibilities of what could happen depending on the choices I made. I saw the person 3 generations from now that Grandpa had mentioned, a woman named Kira who would make a choice between saving humanity and saving the planet, and somehow both choices led to survival, but only if the timeline stayed intact up until that moment. If my family line was disrupted, if the wrong people survived or the right people died, Kira would never be born, and the choice would never be made, and everything would end. The door to my room exploded inward, lock shattering, and Grandpa stood there, but he wasn't Grandpa anymore. His skin was translucent, showing circuitry underneath. His eyes glowing with that wrong light I'd heard in his voice through the basement door. "Give it back, Wesley. That device isn't meant for human neural systems. It will kill you if you don't disconnect now." But I couldn't disconnect. Couldn't let go. Because the memories kept coming, and they were showing me the truth. Grandpa wasn't lying about protecting my family, but he wasn't telling me everything either. The timeline didn't just need protection. It needed correction. Every intervention, every elimination, every manipulation was moving humanity toward one specific future, one specific outcome. And it wasn't about survival. It was about control. The beings who sent Grandpa and the others like him weren't protecting humanity. They were farming it, cultivating specific genetic lines and specific individuals who would make specific choices that would lead to a future where humans became useful to them. Kira wasn't going to save humanity. She was going to deliver it. The device was showing me alternate timelines, branches where my family line was disrupted and humanity developed differently, sometimes better, sometimes worse, but always free. The protected timeline, the one Grandpa was maintaining, led to a future where humans became something else entirely, integrated into a larger system, losing independence in exchange for survival. "Let me make this simple." Grandpa's voice was back to normal, but his appearance was still wrong, still showing the truth underneath the human mask. "You can give me the device, forget everything you've seen, and live normally until it's time for your family to fulfill their purpose. Or, you can keep the device, die from the neural overload, and your family loses protection. Either way, the timeline moves forward. You're not special, Wesley. You're just the current iteration." I looked at my hands and saw they were bleeding, stigmata-style wounds opening up where the device's energy was burning through my human limitations. Grandpa was right. I was dying. The device overwhelming my system, showing me too much too fast. But I'd also seen something else in those memories. I'd seen the 2-knock protocol, the real meaning. It wasn't about being ready to learn the truth and take Grandpa's place. It was about being ready to be eliminated as a timeline threat. The conversation we'd had in the basement was a test, and I'd failed by walking away instead of immediately agreeing. Every Sunday I'd spent in that basement for 11 years had been training. Yes, but not training to become a protector. Training to become compliant, to follow orders without question, to accept authority without resistance. The 3-knock system was conditioning, making me dependent on ritual and routine, so I'd never think to question what was behind the door. And if the conditioning failed, if I showed signs of independent thinking, the 2-knock protocol activated, marking me as a genetic dead end that needed to be removed from the bloodline. "You're going to kill me no matter what I choose." My voice was steady, despite the pain radiating through my body. "The timeline doesn't need me. It just needs my sister." Grandpa's expression shifted, something like respect flickering across his translucent features. "You're smarter than the previous iterations. Most of them never got this far. Yes, Wesley, you were always expendable. Autumn has the stronger genetic markers anyway, but I thought I'd trained you better than this. Thought you'd accept your role like a good soldier." He moved closer, and I saw the basement door was still open behind him. Saw the photographs on the wall showing all the people who'd been eliminated for knowing too much or choosing wrong or simply being in the way. I made a decision that probably killed me, but might save everyone else. I ripped the device away from my chest, felt my skin tear and blood flow, and threw it down the basement stairs. It hit the concrete floor and exploded with a pulse of energy that knocked both Grandpa and me backward. The lights went out throughout the house, and in the darkness I heard him screaming, not in pain, but in rage, as whatever connection he had to his handlers was severed by the device's destruction. I crawled down the hallway, my body failing, and found Autumn's room. She was awake, terrified by the noise and the darkness. "Wesley, what's happening?" I wanted to warn her, to explain everything, but my voice wouldn't work anymore. Instead, I grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the stairs, toward the front door, toward escape. Behind us, Grandpa emerged from the darkness, fully transformed now into something that barely resembled human, all chrome and wire and wrong angles. "Where do you think you're going?" I couldn't answer, could barely move, but I kept pulling Autumn forward. Mom and Dad appeared at the top of the stairs, confused and frightened by the commotion. "Stay back!" I tried to shout, but it came out as a whisper. They didn't listen, started coming down the stairs, and that's when Grandpa moved faster than anything human could move, faster than I could track, and suddenly he was between us and the door. "Nobody leaves. We're going to fix this. We're going to restore the connection, and Wesley is going to donate what's left of his neural pathways to the cause." His hand shot out and grabbed my throat, lifting me off the ground with impossible strength. Autumn was screaming. Mom was screaming. Dad was trying to pull Grandpa away, but he was immovable, unstoppable, designed to eliminate threats, and that's exactly what I'd become. My vision was going dark, the blood loss and oxygen deprivation shutting my brain down, when I heard it. 3 knocks at the front door. Grandpa froze. The knocks came again, deliberate and measured. 3 knocks, just like the protocol, just like the ritual I'd learned 11 years ago. Grandpa turned toward the door, his grip on my throat loosening, and I saw confusion on his inhuman face. That's not possible. The channel was destroyed. The door opened on its own, no one touching it, and figures stepped through. They looked like Grandpa had looked before he dropped the human disguise, translucent and mechanical and wrong, but their energy felt different. One of them spoke in that same stretched wrong voice I'd heard through the basement door. "Designation G7749, you have been compromised. Protocol demands termination and replacement." Grandpa dropped me, and I collapsed, gasping for air, watching as the figures surrounded him. I was protecting the timeline. The device malfunction wasn't my fault. The boy was more resistant than predicted. One of the figures turned to look at me, and I saw something unexpected in its expression. Curiosity. This iteration showed problem-solving skills beyond parameters. Neural resilience exceeded projections. Genetic markers suggest evolution of the line. It approached me, and I was too weak to move away. Its hand, if you could call it that, touched my forehead, and I felt it scanning through my memories, examining every choice I'd made, every thought I'd had. Then it turned to the others. Recommendation: terminate the G-series model and transition to observer-only protocol for this bloodline. The forcing has created unintended consciousness enhancement. This line may self-select toward the optimal future without intervention. I didn't understand all of it, but I understood enough. They were arguing about whether to kill Grandpa and leave us alone. Another figure shook its head, or the equivalent gesture. Timeline analysis shows 73% probability of corruption without active management. The bloodline requires guidance. The first figure considered this. Alternative proposal: allow this iteration to continue unmanaged. Observe outcomes. If timeline remains stable, expand non-intervention protocols to other bloodlines. This could provide valuable data on self-directed timeline optimization. The debate continued in that wrong voice, incomprehensible terms flying back and forth, while I lay on the floor trying not to die, and my family huddled together on the stairs in confusion and terror. Finally, the first figure made a decision. Designation G7749 will be terminated and recycled. This bloodline will continue unmanaged with passive surveillance only. If timeline stability maintains for 3 generations, the experiment expands. If timeline corruption occurs, active intervention resumes. It turned to me again. Human Wesley, you have altered your family's future through actions today. Unknown if alteration is positive. You will be allowed to heal. Your knowledge will remain intact as part of the experiment. Choose wisely going forward. Then they took Grandpa, his screams of protest fading as they dragged him through the door that shouldn't have opened, and the house went silent. The lights came back on, the basement door swung shut and locked itself, and my family sat on the stairs, looking at me bleeding on the floor, completely unable to process what had just happened. Mom was the first to move, rushing to my side with towels to stop the bleeding. Dad was on the phone with 911, his hands shaking so badly he could barely dial. Autumn just stared at the spot where Grandpa had been, her face blank with shock. The ambulance came, and the EMTs looked confused by my injuries because they didn't match any pattern they'd been trained to recognize. Burns and lacerations in perfect geometric patterns, neural damage that shouldn't have been survivable, blood loss that should have killed me an hour ago. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital, and during that time, nobody asked me what happened. Not the doctors, not my parents, not the police who came to investigate the disturbance at our house. It was like everyone had agreed to pretend it never occurred, to move forward without looking back, to preserve whatever normalcy they could find. When I finally came home, the basement door was sealed shut, welded closed from the inside, impossible to open. The photographs on the walls were gone. The surveillance of our house from across the street had vanished. It was like Grandpa had never existed, except we all remembered him, remembered Sunday dinners and garden work, and 11 years of 3 knocks and hot chocolate. Iris visited me and asked what happened, and I wanted to tell her everything, but the words wouldn't come. How do you explain that your family is being farmed for timeline purposes? That free will might be an illusion? That we're all just pieces in a game being played by things we can't understand? Instead, I just said there was an accident and left it at that. She held my hand and didn't push for details, and I loved her more for not asking questions I couldn't answer. Life moved forward, because what else could it do? I graduated high school 3 months later. Autumn started therapy but wouldn't talk about that night. Just drew pictures of chrome figures and locked doors. Mom and Dad never mentioned Grandpa again, packed away his belongings, and converted the basement into a home gym neither of them ever used. Sunday evenings at 6 p.m. became normal time. No special rituals, no locked doors, no 3 knocks. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were still being watched, that somewhere out there, those figures were observing us, taking notes, waiting to see if I'd make the right choices without being guided. Every decision felt weighted with impossible significance. Should I go to college or take a year off? Should I propose to Iris or wait? Should I encourage Autumn to pursue art or push her towards something more practical? Were these just normal life choices? Or was I accidentally steering the timeline toward corruption? The uncertainty was almost worse than the control had been. At least when Grandpa was here, someone else was responsible for maintaining the path. Now it was all on me, on us, on choices we made without knowing which ones mattered. 3 years have passed since that night. Autumn is 12 now, showing no signs of genetic manipulation or timeline awareness. She's just a kid who loves drawing and hates math and fights with her friends and makes up with them the next day. Normal. Mom and Dad have started going to therapy together, working through trauma they can't fully explain to their therapist. They're healing slowly, learning to trust again, to feel safe in their own home. Iris and I got engaged last month, and when I proposed, I didn't feel the weight of timeline significance. I just felt happy, and maybe that meant the experiment was working. Maybe we really could self-select toward the optimal future without intervention. Or maybe I'm deluding myself and we're still being farmed, just with longer leashes and prettier cages. I still have nightmares about the basement, about 3 knocks that echo through empty hallways, about chrome figures watching from across the street. Some mornings I wake up and check the windows, expecting to see someone documenting our house, but there's nothing there except normal neighbors living normal lives. The scar on my chest where I ripped the device away never fully healed. Geometric patterns burned into my skin like a permanent reminder of what I learned. Sometimes Iris traces them with her fingers and asks what really happened that night, and I want to tell her so badly it physically hurts to keep the secret. But maybe some truths are too dangerous to share, too heavy for one person to carry alone. Or maybe I'm just being paranoid, seeing patterns where none exist, unable to distinguish between normal life anxiety and actual timeline surveillance. That's what they'd want, right? For me to never be sure, to always question, to make decisions based on uncertainty rather than guidance. Keep humans off balance and they'll optimize themselves toward stability. Last Sunday at 6 p.m., I was making dinner when I heard 3 knocks on the front door. My heart stopped. Iris was in the living room and called out, "I'll get it." I dropped the knife I was holding and ran to stop her, but she'd already opened the door. It was just Kyle, my best friend from high school, stopping by to see if I wanted to hang out. 3 knocks on the door, completely normal, nothing sinister, just a friend visiting. I laughed at my own paranoia and invited him in, and we played video games and talked about nothing important, and it felt so beautifully mundane I almost cried. But as he was leaving, Kyle paused at the door and looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. "You doing okay, Wes? You seem on edge lately." I assured him I was fine, just stressed about work and wedding planning, normal stuff. He nodded and left, and I watched him walk to his car, watched him drive away, and couldn't shake the feeling that something about the interaction was wrong. The way he'd paused at the door, the way he'd looked at me, the 3 knocks instead of just ringing the bell like he usually did. I went to the window and watched his car disappear around the corner, and I saw something that made my blood run cold. Across the street, in the window of the house that had been empty for months, a light flickered on for just a second, long enough for me to see a figure standing there, watching, long enough for me to see its translucent skin and chrome underneath. Then the light went out, and the figure was gone, and I was left wondering if I'd really seen anything at all, or if I was just going insane from 3 years of wondering. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed next to Iris, listening to her breathe, thinking about timelines and choices, and whether free will existed, or if we were all just acting out predetermined scripts. The notification on my phone lit up at 3 a.m., an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line just said, "Protocol Update." I should have deleted it, should have ignored it, but I opened it anyway, because some part of me needed to know. The email was simple. Bloodline stability maintained at acceptable levels. Observation protocol extended indefinitely. 3-generation evaluation postponed. Continue current trajectory. 3 knocks indicate surveillance check-in if assistance required. 2 knocks indicate timeline emergency. 1 knock indicates corruption event. No knocks indicate free operation. You have chosen well, Wesley. I read it 17 times, trying to understand if this was real, or if I was having some kind of psychotic break. Were they really giving me a choice about when to make contact? Or was this just another layer of control, making me think I had agency while still operating within their parameters? The smart thing would be to never knock, to live my life completely free of their system. But what if something happened that required their intervention? What if by trying to maintain independence I accidentally corrupted the timeline and doomed Kira 3 generations from now? The weight of it pressed down on me until I couldn't breathe. I got out of bed and went to the front door, standing in the hallway in the dark, staring at it like it might answer questions I didn't know how to ask. 3 knocks for surveillance check-in. 2 knocks for emergency. 1 knock for corruption. No knocks for freedom. The choice was mine, they claimed. But how could it be a real choice when the consequences were so incomprehensible? If I knocked 3 times, I was inviting them back in, admitting I couldn't handle this responsibility alone. If I knocked twice, I was declaring an emergency that might not exist. If I knocked once, I was admitting to corruption I hadn't committed. And if I never knocked, I was gambling with the future of humanity based on nothing but my own flawed judgment. I raised my hand, let it hover 6 inches from the door, thought about Autumn sleeping upstairs, about Iris in our bed, about Mom and Dad in their house across town, about the wedding we were planning and the life we were building and the future that might or might not matter, depending on choices I might or might not make correctly. My hand dropped. I walked away from the door, made myself tea, sat at the kitchen table until sunrise, trying to convince myself I'd made the right choice, that no knocks meant freedom, that we could live normally without their surveillance and their intervention and their timeline manipulation, that maybe the optimal future was one where humans made their own choices, even if those choices led to suboptimal outcomes. But I couldn't shake the image of that figure across the street, watching from the empty house, documenting our lives the way Grandpa had documented all those eliminated threats. The surveillance hadn't ended. It had just become more subtle, more patient, waiting to see if I'd break and invite them back in. This morning, I got up and made breakfast like it was any other day. Iris asked if I slept well, and I lied and said yes. Mom called to ask about wedding venue options, and I pretended to be excited about tablecloth colors. Autumn texted asking if I could help her with homework later, and I said of course, big brother duties never end. Normal life, continuing normally, with chrome figures watching from empty windows and 3 knock protocols waiting for me to fail. Appreciate you watching this far. If you enjoyed it, drop a like, leave a comment, and subscribe so you won't miss the next story.